be able to apply it in our lives this week and in the weeks and months and years to come. In Jesus' name, amen. Proverbs 21 is where we are, and we've come as far as verse 5, so we will pick up there. We've had a few weeks of introductory material, and then we covered the first four verses. Last week was the Thanksgiving Eve service. That was a special night, so I appreciate James and his work getting music together. I always enjoy that. So we are in Proverbs 21, verse 5, which reads, "The plans of the diligent lead surely to advantage, but everyone who is hasty comes surely to poverty." The word plans there has to do with thinking ahead and long-term goals. So that's easy to see, even in our English word there, plans. So understand, we're referring to the diligent person. When we think of the diligent person in Proverbs, we think of someone who works hard, and that certainly is true. But note here, a diligent person also does what? Plans well, and then carefully implements those plans. So there's a lot more to diligence than just working hard. The word advantage there means abundance and having plenty. So you kind of see where this is headed. I think finances and money and wealth is kind of the emphasis of this verse. And we learn that patience and planning lead to prosperity. What? Not playing the lottery? I thought playing the lottery. That's how you... No, that's not it. So we see the word but there, so we know this is antithetical parallelism. We're going to have a contrast in the verse. And we're kind of surprised, at least I was, the first part, the plans of the diligent lead surely to advantage, but, and I would have expected a reference to the sluggard, right, or to the slothful. But no, instead, everyone who is hasty comes surely to poverty. So those who are hasty, meaning those who are reckless, those who are impulsive, those who just surge ahead, they don't plan, they really don't think things through. And I think the hastiness here is a hastiness to get rich. I want to get rich quick. I want money, and I want it now. I want wealth, and I want it now. So a person who diligently and carefully plans his work and then works his plan is contrasted here to someone who's just careless, and they just make rash decisions, and they just do what they're going to do without really thinking them through. And that's not going to work. Now, in our culture, we have the phrase, haste makes waste. So that kind of ties in here to this proverb. I think Nehemiah would be a good example. Early on in that book, we see him planning and thinking through, being diligent. I had started a Nehemiah series with the Crossroads when I then started preaching the morning and evening, and then decided it was probably best if I not keep teaching that class. So I've got Nehemiah in my blood, so I may have to come back to that, maybe in the auditorium here. So at least indirectly, this verse is against this idea of get rich quick. And Proverbs says a lot about that. Don't fall prey to that mentality of getting rich quick. And how do we build wealth? And I don't know if Lisa or John or Deborah will remember, but there are two foundational truths in the book of Proverbs for how we build wealth. Number one is work hard. Oh, you knew I was going to have to say that, but look at Proverbs 10:4. Bible's not against wealth, building wealth, but do it God's way. Proverbs 10:4, poor is he who works with a negligent hand, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. So we start with hard work. The other foundational truth, not only work hard, but work smart. And that would be Proverbs, look at Proverbs 22:29. Do you see a man skilled in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before obscure men. So remember, Proverbs are general principles. It won't happen 100% of the time, but as a general rule, if you work hard and if you have skills that you have developed, God will honor that, God will bless that, and over the long haul, you will build wealth gradually over time. But of course, our hearts naturally go in the other direction, right? We tend to be impatient. We tend to be greedy. We want it, and we want it now. That's not God's way. Do it God's way, and He will honor that. Now, verse 6 still, I think, continues the theme of money and wealth of Proverbs 21. The acquisition of treasures by a lying tongue is a fleeting vapor, the pursuit of death. We might say, in our vernacular, crime doesn't pay, right? Something along those lines. So the hasty of verse 5, in other words, the hasty to get rich, are now described here in verse 6 as trying to obtain their treasures by deception, and in particular, deceptive speech. What would be some examples of that, like in our day and age? Cheating on your income taxes, not being honest. If you have an expense account at work, kind of padding the expense account. You don't suppose a hospital would ever overcharge a patient or an insurance company. And then in the old days, when we used to pay with cash, sometimes the cashier might give us too much change, make a mistake. Were we to keep that, that would be in violation. That would be acquiring treasure by deception. So the proverb here teaches, if you think you can build wealth, get rich, and have finances by being deceptive, you're only fooling yourself. You're deceiving yourself. Now, maybe initially it seems like, hey, this is going to work, but note the word vapor there. A vapor appears for a little while and then it's gone. So the plans will not work out in the long run if you are in whatever fashion going to be building wealth in a way that doesn't please God. It'll start you down a road that leads eventually to death. If you want some advice, talk to the prodigal son, and he can add some information to that. Verse 7, the violence of the wicked will drag them away because they refuse to act with justice. Wow, our culture is becoming more and more violent. And then we're seeing just, even in recent days and weeks, just violent acts that are being committed that were just unheard of, like when I was growing up as a kid. But, we shouldn't be surprised. We have violence in movies and violence on TV and on the internet, and that begins to have its effect. A couple weeks ago, I was down in my office in the basement at my house. I was hearing yelling and screaming going on, so I'm looking out the window, and it was a domestic dispute at the gas station. A husband and wife, or at least a couple that maybe live together, were just getting gas, and I don't know what happened, but four police cars of the Parsippany police had to show up and be taken away from whatever else they might have needed to be doing in the city of Parsippany because of, and they were angry. It just, especially the girl. I mean, the office. She was even more out of control than the guy, and just trying to calm them down. And so that's the society that we live in. And the proverb here says, okay, if that's your life, if you're going to be involved in violence, at some point, very well, you may get caught up in it yourself, and it could very well be your demise. And so the fate befalls them because they have no respect for justice. Biblical example of that might be Joab. Remember Joab? He murdered Amasa and Abner. You know, totally uncalled for. Now, eventually, David dies, and then when Solomon takes over, remember, Solomon executes Joab for not letting justice run its course and taking matters into his own hands. So he's an example, a real-life example, a real-life death example. If you live a life of violence, that may be the way you end your life. That word, drag them away, that's used in Habakkuk 1:15, of fish being caught up in a net and being dragged away. I found that interesting. Now, of course, for human beings, the dragging away could very well be in a body bag, if that's the life you're going to promote. Verse 8, the way of a guilty man is crooked, but as for the pure, his conduct is upright. So we need to choose our daily deeds on the assumption they're all going to be exposed. Now, they may not be here on earth, but someday in heaven, we give an account for everything, either for good or for ill. If you're always finding that you have to explain your actions or excuse your actions, you're probably tipping your hand that you're having to live a life of covering up things that you shouldn't be doing in the first place. So in the first half of that verse, we have guilty and crooked. I think of Ahab when I think of those terms. But the contrast there, here we go again, antithetical parallelism, pure and upright. How about Daniel? What a good example he would be. Now verse 9. On Sunday I had to deal with wives being submissive, and now on Wednesday I've got this verse. It is better to live in a corner of a roof than in a house shared with a contentious woman. And before you, I guess there's only two husbands that are sitting next to their wives. So before you men are tempted to elbow your wife, men, you just need to be aware of, we're not exempted from this trait. Look at chapter 26 and verse 21. Not that either of our men would, or either of our three men would have elbowed their wives, but 26:21, like charcoal to hot embers and wood to fire, so is a contentious man to kindle strife. Okay, men, we're not exempted. We're just, we have that capacity as well. But perhaps, the Bible recognizes that the different genders might have certain tendencies, like we saw on Sunday. For we dads probably are more apt to exasperate our children than our wives are as a mother. What a statement here. So isolation and solitude, no matter how uncomfortable it would be, would still be better to having continual conflict in the home. Now, let me back up, talk about a little Bible culture. I think I covered this maybe in my COVID Sunday night series. But the roofs in Israel were often and usually flat, so you could actually spend time on the roof, use it as a patio. Probably not big enough, the homes, to have like a croquet course on your roof. Look at 1 Samuel 9:25, where we have an example of this. 1 Samuel 9. When they came down from the high place into the city, Samuel spoke with Saul on the roof. 1 Samuel 9:25, verse 26. And they arose early, and at daybreak Samuel called to Saul on the roof, saying, "Get up, that I may send you away." So Saul arose, and both he and Samuel went out into the street. Typical when it was very, very hot. You can imagine being in the house, in Israel during a sweltering temperature. So it was much cooler if you were to spend the night on the roof. it reminds me of like being at summer camp. Do any of you have those memories, being at summer camp? And it was like 98 degrees during the day, and the cabin just soaked up all the heat. And then there you are as a dumb junior high boy, and you're in your sleeping bag in this cabin with no air conditioning. Now, I think most camps today have air conditioning in the cabins. But when I was a kid, oh, we had it so rough. So here in Bible times, you would sleep on the roof. But in this scenario, it's not necessarily a pleasant experience. It's implying that it could be inclement weather, and that would still be better if you were on the roof, if you had tension in the home. So unfortunately, there were some men even in the Bible who had, probably we would say, contentious wives. Job probably would fall in that category. Jacob, David, and that made for some significant problems. Now, I got to admit, I'm really perplexed that this particular proverb is repeated a number of times with slight variations, different analogies or illustrations, and I really don't understand that. It would seem to me that would be not as deserving. I don't think there's as many wives who would be contentious, but be that as it may, for example, look down in verse 19. We'll come to this in a few weeks. Is that what I want? Yeah, it is better to live in a desert land than with a contentious and vexing woman. So we have that in verse 19, chapter 25, verse 14, chapter 19, verse 13, and chapter 27, verse 15. So I don't know, maybe it's just a matter of emphasizing to young men especially, be careful in your choice of a wife. Because, we say this to singles. I don't know how comforting it is, but those of us who are married, and those of us who maybe have counseled troubled marriages, the loneliness of singleness doesn't compare with being in a marriage where there is contention and strife and problems. So that may be the reason why this particular command is repeated another time, because it is the perspective of a father giving advice to his son for life. And a wife has the potential, unfortunately, because the wife, like the husband, has a sin nature, to make the home unpleasant and desirable. But if the wife is walking with the Lord, the wife can have such an impact on the home. And the wife really does set, to a large degree, the tone of the home. And I don't mean just the decorating, but the mindset and all those sort of things. And I know you know what that's all about. Okay, let's move on. Verse 10. The soul of the wicked desires evil. His neighbor finds no favor in his eyes. Now, I know when we read the word neighbor, we immediately think of who's next door to you on the left and who's next door on the right. Well, that's not how Bible neighborhoods work. Neighbor in the Bible sense means literally somebody who's near. So it's actually quite broad. In fact, this is a word that's used for a friend. So the word is pretty broad, meaning most anybody that we would any fellow man that we would come in contact with. So we can continually look for ways to gain advantage over our neighbor, and that's what this proverb is warning against. Don't do that. Don't be motivated by selfishness. Don't be looking for an edge, even if it means hurting others. We generally find what we're out to look for. If we're going to assume the worst in our neighbor or our friend or someone we work with, that's probably what we're going to find. If we're assuming the best, we're probably going to find the positive traits in their life, and that's what this proverb is encouraging us to do. Verse 11, when the scoffer is punished, the naive becomes wise, but the wise is instructed. But when the wise is instructed, he receives knowledge. So this proverb is about degrees of teachability, from the lowest to the highest. So we have three categories here. We have the scoffer, we have the naive, and we have the wise. Now the scoffer, sometimes that's translated scorner or mocker. So depending on what version you have, but we're talking about the same dude in all of those. What is a scoffer? The scoffer is unteachable. So the scoffer, this is the highest, or maybe we should say the lowest. This is the worst. You can't teach a scoffer. The scoffer would be that student that unfortunately any teacher, if a teacher is taught long enough, has, where that word incorrigible. The teacher might even say that. You are just incorrigible. And of course the kid has no idea what that means, but the teacher knows very well that you cannot be corrected. And usually that's a student that doesn't end up being a student in the class for the entire year. So the scoffer does not like correction, makes no effort toward attaining wisdom. And it's not like we'll see with the naive that they're just kind of mindless and just kind of gullible. No, this is a deliberate, dig your heels in. I won't be taught. I won't be corrected. This is the way I'm going to do it, and don't tell me otherwise. And that's sad. Now, when someone in this category resists the truth, they should still be rebuked, even though it becomes obvious after a certain point that it's not going to do any good, because we don't want that person to be influencing others. And it reminds me, look at 1 Timothy 5:20, where I think Timothy's advice is rather similar. 1 Timothy 5:20. Those who continue in sin rebuke in the presence of all, so that the rest also will be fearful of sinning. So I guess there may be a temptation for a scorner just to give up. There's no use, but no, we still have an obligation to rebuke, to correct. And it may be the only reason is for others who are watching, that they may learn a lesson or they may be impacted. And that's exactly the case when we see the second category here, the naive. So when the scoffer is punished, confronted, rebuked, the naive takes note of that. And that's a good thing. So what is naive? I think some translations translate it simple. It really doesn't have anything to do with the intellect. These are moral categories here. So the naive, the root idea is deceive or seduce. So the naive is, we might say gullible, or silly, just kind of, just the mind is kind of just open and, not really thinking things through. He's not a scorner, but he's not really taking life that seriously, irresponsible. But the good news is with the naive, visual aids, object lessons can potentially impact him, and he can benefit from seeing what happens to the scoffer. Now, one never stays still. Apparently, to run with this, you're always moving in one direction or another, and we might say the naive is empty-headed. But empty-headedness never stays as empty-headedness. If it's going in the wrong direction, it eventually becomes wrong-headedness. It becomes the scorner or the scoffer. We want to get the naive on this other path so that he becomes wise, as verse 11 says. So I wish our criminal justice system recognized this, that there is value in doing appropriate punishment. And then number 3, we have the wise. A wise person learns by instruction. So a wise person, number 1, he's teachable. And a wise person, you can just say something and he will benefit. He'll be mindful of that. He will be impacted by that. He doesn't even have to see it happen before he realizes, oh, yeah, whoa, yeah, look what happened. He can be taught, and that's a sign of wisdom. So we might compare the three this way. The scoffer has a closed mind. The naive has just kind of an empty mind. And the wise has an open mind. Now, I know sometimes when we talk about being open-minded, that means, oh, I'm open even to debauchery and error. No, that's not what I mean by open mind, but open to wisdom, open to instruction from God's Word. Let's do one more verse, then we'll take some prayer requests. The righteous one, verse 12, the righteous one considers the house of the wicked, turning the wicked to ruin. All right, to interpret this verse, we have to make a decision. Who is the righteous one? You got two choices. We're either referring to a human being or we're referring to God. Now, obviously, if you have the NASB, they believe it would be a human being, small r, small o. Other versions would have capital R, capital O, meaning they think it's God. So if you conclude that a human being is in view here, the point is that a righteous man thoughtfully observes the downfall of the wicked man's house. Not that he brings it about, turning the wicked to ruin, but he observes what's going on there and takes note of that. I'm inclined to think this is referring to God, so I would have translated it with a capital R, capital O. That's the simplest, easiest interpretation. And it's really the second half of the verse that kind of settled it in my mind, that phrase there, turning the wicked to ruin. That sounds really like something only God could do, not a human. So that if I'm correct in that, then the interpretation would be God evaluates the household of every wicked person. God knows everything that's going on, even behind closed doors, and will bring all the wicked to ruin eventually, meaning to judgment, to accountability. There will be consequences. There will be a harvesting from the reaping that they did. And only God fully knows what the wicked do and can bring them to ruin. And again, so that's why I'm inclined to think it's referring to God. Now that should encourage, I hope, the righteous and the godly to know that even though I know so often it seems like the godly are flourishing, they've got it made, everything seems to go right with them, and why is it so tough for my life as a child of God? Well, this verse reminds us, really, don't even be tempted for a moment to change places, because there will be an accounting. There really will be, and always remember the eternal destiny. So just a reminder, there's always only one correct interpretation. Now there are sometimes, like in this proverb, the grammar, the context will allow for two, both of them would work, but the bottom line is that you got to make a choice as best as you are able. And there's always only one correct interpretation, but there could be a variety of applications. And just a quick review on that. So whatever way you go, whatever interpretation, they're both similar in this regard. There are consequences to sin. There will be an accounting, and that's the case either way. I probably heard it more than once at our PCS retreats. Speakers who would really hammer this truth. It's true. Sin will take you farther than you want to go, keep you longer than you want to stay, and cost you more than you want to pay. And that's so true. And, we work hard to get young people, but it's so hard for young people to get that. But we're going to keep trying. We're going to keep hammering that truth and with God's help to preserve a lot of heartache. And here's a verse that is along those same lines. All right, let me make a note here for next week, December 7th. Pearl Harbor Day, I guess that would be. Is that a special anniversary? I guess 2022 wouldn't be. Well, I can't remember the year.
81.
Oh, that's right. Okay.